If you're not, back to your laptop or device, please do. Okay, so we will move to approval of the amending bylaws. It was moved. Please keep your devices muted when you're not speaking. Thank you. So approve the amending bylaws. It was submitted by President Easton. I'm just going to assume that they are the mover. Can we have a seconder? I'll second.
Did I already second that?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, you seconded moving to that motion, not the motion itself. And so I seconded, and it was moved by President Easton. President Easton, as the mover, you have the first speaking turn if you'd like.
There's a point of order.
Also, sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
Sorry, I hate to bring this up. Did we have an agenda amendment at the beginning of the meeting?
We did. We had switched the order of 4.1 and 4.2, but then President Easton made a motion to move directly to approval of the amending bylaw.
Okay.
At that
thank
point,
you. Sorry,
so
I thought
we are there.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I thought it was to proceed past reports, not to a specific motion. Okay.
They moved to a specific motion. Perfect. Go ahead, President Easton.
Thanks. So yeah, I think the motion is rather self-explanatory, whereas the council and board have both accepted in principle the final report of the Booster Governance Review and its primary recommendation to move to a single governing board permanent CEO model. And then council indicated at the last meeting its preference to extend the governing year so as to give us more time to have a bylaw in place by the annual, or ready to be ratified by the annual general meeting to take place in March. In order for that to happen, it requires basically a temporary amendment to the bylaw to allow us not to hold an election in the winter. So I present to council a bylaw amendment to that effect for approval. If it is approved by council, then I will give notice to the board of directors as outlined in Article 14 of the bylaws. Board gets 10 business days notice on any bylaw amendment. Council, due to the nature of this bylaw amendment, has to approve as well. Just a simple majority suffices, and the board would have to pass it with 2/3 majority. Then we would call a special general meeting to be held in likely the 3rd or 4th week of January to ratify this change and allow us to sort of proceed on the timeline to have a new governing model likely coming into force on the 1st of September or thereabouts for sort of an adjustment year. So that's the reason to present this bylaw.
Thank you, President Easton. Councillor Macri, go ahead.
I'm very disturbed by the contents of this proposed bylaw amendment. The proposed bylaw gives board the sole power to suspend elections for up to a year with no accountability or oversight. This proposal undermines this council and allows a handful of board members to unilaterally extend their terms in office, the executive's terms in office, and councillors' terms in office. And for what? Dissolving council, ending the tradition of constituency-based democracy that has existed in this organization even prior to incorporation, and concentrating power with a handful of students who are able to dedicate large amounts of time to their work outside of school. I did not campaign in the election on dissolving council and replacing it with a board of fiduciaries. I don't remember any of my fellow councillors campaigning on that either. I do not believe that even the executives who are pushing this proposal campaigned on dissolving council either. There has been no referendum and no general meeting, and with COVID restrictions, it remains unclear if and when we can have such a general meeting. We have no democratic mandate to impose this change on our students, and even if it's legal, by proceeding on the path we are currently on, our organization will lose democratic legitimacy in the eyes of our students. One of the jobs of council is to hold executives and board accountable, and I believe it is time we exercise our authority and course correct. This governance review process has been extremely rushed. At our previous council meeting, this council tasked the governance committee to look into the impacts on advocacy of the proposed governance changes. We also expressed concerns about if the liaison system would give students a strong connection to their elected student leaders. Our president extended an invite to all councillors to attend the governance committee meeting, and I commend him for that. So I took up the offer and went to the meeting, where I was astonished to see council's directives were not respected. While an appropriate and sufficient amount of time was spent discussing the merits of having faculties represented on board or not, no real solution was presented to council's concerns, and a liaison system that had already been identified as problematic by some councillors was still pushed forward. To be fair, council did not explicitly vote saying we had concerns with the liaison system, but several councillors had voiced concerns with that aspect of the proposed model. However, council did explicitly task the governance committee to do a very specific thing: investigate the impacts to advocacy of the proposed governance reforms. I was disappointed to see that this did not happen. The governance committee spent maybe 10 minutes discussing the advocacy impacts of the new model, and I felt like that short discussion just consisted of me and our Vice President of Education to an extent, expressing concerns that were dismissed as problems for later. And councillors' concerns at the last meeting were dismissed in the same way. While it may sound all well and good to say that's an operational detail, we'll figure it out later. The reality is, this is a complicated process that takes time away from the executives from doing their regular job of working for students, and also costs money in legal fees to go to lawyers to have things such as this bylaw drafted. If we continue allowing council to get railroaded and have our concerns dismissed with the line, "That's a detail to figure out later," and then once the next meeting comes, those concerns haven't been addressed, I fear we will find ourselves in a situation where it comes time to give final approval to the governance changes, and none of the issues council identified will have been addressed. At that point, I feel like we will have no choice but to vote down the entire proposal, wasting everyone's time and also wasting legal fees and not getting any governance reforms out of the whole process. The only way to avoid such a scenario is to quit rushing the process, and it is the right, and I believe the duty of council, to do so by rejecting this radical suspension of elections and telling the executives and board to carry out this process properly.
Thank you, Councillor Macri. We have VP Dong for respond, followed by Councillor Yang, followed by President Easton. Go ahead, VP Dong.
Thanks, Shannon. Sorry, I just have like "I am disturbed" ringing in my head. I appreciate the thought you've put into this, Vincent. I realize that the bylaw amendments look pretty, I guess, like radical, but I'll ask you to keep in mind that last council meeting, council made it very clear that the preferred timeline overwhelmingly was for us to move forward with new bylaw implementation along a timeline that includes extending the governing year through spring 2022 and then implementing for fall 2022. And these bylaws are the legal way to go about that. So we're simply going forward with what council presented as their preferred timeline to move forward with. This isn't coming out of nowhere. This was not drafted until after council made it clear what their preferred way of moving forward was. So while I appreciate your concerns, I just wanted to say that I think that that particular component to what you said is unwarranted.
Thank you, VP Dong. Councillor Yang, go ahead with your direct response.
Yeah, I just want to categorically disagree with parts of what earlier councilor said. I really do not think this is a unilateral decision by board, because if it was, they wouldn't be even coming to council. This is something that council already decided was the best path forward at the last meeting, that we want to extend the governing year. This is what council decided. Multiple options were given to council at that point, and council voted towards that favor. So this is working towards recommendations of council. I fail to see where it's coming from that this is something being pushed unilaterally by a small group of students when it's already been voted on by council. Secondly, I think there is a point to be made that the governance committee spent over nearly 2 hours discussing various aspects of the report, as you well know, having been in that meeting, and you know that we discussed many aspects, and oftentimes the reason we advocacy was discussed, and I feel like if there was more things to be discussed there, it should be brought up at that committee and suggested that we meet again instead of just bringing it to council here, right? I see the council's concerns about going through this in a proper way with all the timelines adhered to, yes, but at the same time, I feel like if there is a will in this council to make something happen, it is odd to be dismissing that will and trying to slow it down for the sake of procedure, or because we want to make things seem fair without actually, putting some more work. So that's all.
Thank you. Councilor Mackey, I'm going to let your POI go ahead.
I'd like to ask my fellow councilor in the engineering caucus if he noticed the wording in the proposed bylaw does say that the board of directors may, in its sole discretion, defer this election to any date that is not later than 12 months after the annual general meeting. That's what I was referring to when I was saying board would be able to do this, suspend elections unilaterally. That is
If I
what
may
is in the
respond,
text.
May I
Cannon.
respond, since it is a point of inquiry?
If I may respond, Cannon.
Technically, this
It was
question was
directed.
directed to a particular councilor, so if they're okay with not responding, I will let you respond, Ben.
I just want to respond to the specific point, which is yes, I did see that part, and I do understand that.
Thank you.
And-
Ben, go ahead.
The advice we've received from legal counsel has been such that the authority. So this is an extraordinary process. We understand that. I think I campaigned on a governance review. I have been clear and, in fact, unequivocal with council that there are big changes coming since at least August for the last 4 months. I have worked with both board and council to get acceptance of this report, and this bylaw was, as Councillor Dong said, is being presented to council at the request of council, who were all duly elected or acclaimed or appointed by their societies or otherwise. The advice we've received from legal counsel is that the decision, the authority to suspend elections in this extraordinary process should be vested with a single body, right? To spare us from having this sort of bicameral decision. It's simpler for the implementation to let the board fix a date where the new model will come into force. The decision is not about having board take over elections. It's about having the decision-making authority vested in a single place that is clear and understood by everybody for the sake of clarity in this process and, in fact, transparency. And the purpose of bringing this amendment to council is, in fact, to give us more time to work on the concerns that you have raised. The alternative is that we present the entire bylaw this month, and which would only be more rushed. This is a way for us to actually do our due diligence.
Thank you, President Easton, and I believe the next person to directly respond. Oh, well, that was you, Ben. So, unless you have another separate thing that you'd like to say, no, it's okay. We will move to Representative Aquino's point 1. Ben, can you keep track of the speaking order, because I think this is going to get confusing real quick.
Councillor Macri has a POI.
That was already answered. Oh,
No,
wait,
this is
they
a
have
new
another
POI.
one. Go ahead, Councillor Macri.
Was council told at the last council meeting when we made this previous decision that implementation would necessitate giving board the sole discretion to suspend elections for up to 12 months?
Council approved the notion of extending the governing year, which requires the suspension of elections, and this bylaw is to the effect of the demands of council. It's just that corporately speaking, it makes sense for the board to have that authority, given its primacy in the eyes of the law, and the lawyers have suggested this. Cannon, sorry this is an aside, but I'm a little lost on the speaking order, so bear with me.
Sure, no worries. I will move on to Representative Aquino. I know that they are next, and
Actually,
go ahead.
Jay, then Stephanie, and then Salmon and then Matthew all have direct responses to people. I'm not for a bit.
Sorry, folks. This is gonna be a fun discussion. Councillor Lan, go ahead and directly respond.
Thank you. I guess in the last meeting, all of us agreed on the in-principle changes for the governing body. I would say it's a fundamental changes. So I understand Vincent's concerns about is it too rush, is it too fast. My concern is we approved the timeline. We finish this by September next year. If we don't finish on time, we might extend another term. That's like our the new administration should be in place in May, right? Or we already extend to September. If we need more time to do the bylaw changes, to write the policies, there's a concern that people in this meeting today want to stay one more term longer than expected.
Thank you. Councillor Dong, you have a POI. Go ahead. Sorry, VP Dong.
I'm very
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
Speaker. I feel like this is.
I'm gonna. Well, never mind. Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to ask if the president could clarify for the assembly how the timeline of general elections and general meetings work within the bylaws and why it's necessary for a bylaw amendment to be made prior to extending things. Just for, clarification.
While I appreciate that, I do not think that's the correct use of a POI.
Canon. I'm
Go ahead.
going
Yes,
to
I know you have a
suggest.
POI.
I'm going to suggest that we use the raise hand function in Teams and permit everybody one response follow-up to their hand raised turn. Just because the ones and twos and then like direct response to the direct response getting out of hand, and like as I think I need to be actively participating in this debate. I don't think I'm in a position to do that. So I'll suggest that we use the raise hand function, go through, and each person gets one response to like follow-up question on their respective turns, and no points of inquiry or order. We just get around, or points of order, but no points of inquiry.
I believe that's a fair thing, although I think that goes against. Well, they'll still have their speaking turn, so it's just like we are reducing the number of direct responses that any person can use, if I'm correct, right?
The spirit of having the twos in the chat was from when we had in-person meetings, and you would raise your hand to ask to speak, and if you wanted to directly respond, you might put up two, like, oh, let me butt in quickly. But if we're using the raise hand function, you get one follow-up question per your hand raised turn. I think that accomplishes the same thing.
Okay, I guess we will do that. Vincent, go ahead with your POI.
So it's a point of order. I don't think it's in order to not allow points of inquiry unless we were to suspend the rules, the rules of the meeting, which we would have to vote on, and requires a 2/3 majority.
It's going to be nearly impossible for at least me to deal with both the chat and the raise hand function at the same time, because you can only open one at a time.
So I'm suggesting we stick with our regular rules of procedure.
Okay, in just normal terms, I'm going to restrict direct responses. I'm going to get rid of this entire speaking order that we have, and we're going to set a new in the chat itself, and there will only, each person is only like allowed to do one direct response to the speaking turn, if that makes sense. Like if, let's say, Vincent gave a point, I can only respond directly once, and that's it till the time we move to the next one. So we will be doing that. Starting first, we had Councillor Macri with their one. Go ahead, Councillor Macri.
I move to indefinitely postpone a decision on this item.
Do we have a seconder?
I can second it.
Sorry, can you speak who was? Just your name.
My name is Angela, Counselor
Oh,
Angela.
thanks. Yeah, Councilor Souza. Seconds. Basically, what Councilor Macri and Councilor Souza have motioned is to postpone the approval of this motion indefinitely, which would mean God knows when it will come back. As the mover, Councilor Macri, you have the right to speak. Also, sorry, before we go on that, just because I know this is going to be somewhat of a contentious issue, I'm going to call a roll call vote on this, so we actually know the numbers, but go ahead.
I think, as I was saying before, this process has been extremely rushed. I believe it is misleading when our president says that it would be more rushed if we were to not approve this, because there's an alternative that he is not mentioning, which is we do not need to do this in one governing year, and I don't believe we should. A change of this magnitude certainly requires extensive consultation with students and a firm democratic mandate. With the current, and again, with the current COVID restrictions, it's not clear that we'll be able to have a proper general meeting of the members. And I think it would be completely illegitimate to dissolve student council without an actual mandate from students. Yes, you may have campaigned on governance reforms, but I don't think most students would expect that to mean dissolving council. And council, just because council made a decision before, that report was dropped on us just a few days, and just the scope of the restructuring proposed, I think, takes more than a few days to think about. I think it's reasonable that, after more reflection, looking through the report in detail, noticing that some of the recommendations from the consultants, like recommendation 16, is just illegal for us to do. I've lost a lot of faith in the report, just given these glaring issues of recommendations that would be flagrant violations of the law. I think at this point we really need to slow down. It's not bad if this takes more than one governing year to implement a change of this size, and we should actually make sure that these changes make sense and are good for the organization. Right now, I feel like, the executives want to leave some kind of mark or have this as some sort of legacy piece, without regard to just proper governance and making sure that democracy and procedure is being respected, and we're doing this legitimately. And I mean legitimately in the sense of democratically. I'm not questioning the legal legitimacy of any of this.
Thank you, Councilor Macri. We have a direct response from WP Schwartz. Go ahead.
Thank you. So first off, I guess, we all have conflict of interest or whatever, although as I've indicated, I will not be staying on full time if the governing year is extended. But extending the governing year is what I feel is the best option. So I guess sort of conflict of interest, but not really. Kind of, whatever. So I'm not understanding some of the discussion here, because I think some of it is discussing is looking to discuss a different thing, which is the governance review, and not sort of the item on the floor here, which, as we've discussed, is a bylaw amendment to give us the ability to extend the governing year. Now, one thing I want to make clear, as somebody that was part of the process in getting this bylaw amendment from the lawyers, is we did not ask them in any way to vest the power in the board or to make it a year or any of the details of this. We asked, can you get? We gave them the line that council voted in favor of and overwhelmingly preferred, which is the one I agreed with as well. We gave that to them and said, can you draft a bylaw amendment to this effect? And they did. And that is what they came back with, because that was legally the best way to achieve what we wanted. So my opinion there tends to be it's best to defer to what lawyers say. And then in terms of the idea of this being rushed, that's what I'm talking about, what I see as sort of a misplaced discussion, because this is not looking to, the item on the floor specifically is actually to decrease the degree to which this is being rushed. And Councilor Macri is right in that another option on the floor or on the table is to extend this and do this during the whole of the next governing year. That is an option on the table, and that was something that we discussed extensively at council at the last meeting. where for varying different reasons, such as, including the advice of the consultants, was that implementing it over a long period of time, you lose the memory of the people that actually started the implementation. There you have the people that started the implementation aren't even around when the implementation is being wrapped up, let alone actually being adopted, worked with, and amended as fit. So it really decreases the ability to have a quality thing, and there is such a thing as taking too long. I believe that very fervently, and that's an item we've already discussed. That's something we've already gone through, and we can absolutely revisit that. But that's not what's on the floor right now. What's on the floor right now is affecting council's preference in the best way the lawyers saw fit. So that's something I don't quite understand, but I would really like if our discussion centered around that rather than around the larger governance stuff, because we can absolutely talk about the larger governance stuff again, and that's probably something that's absolutely something we will talk about. And if there's so much interest on council, we should talk about it. But I think that we should be focusing discussion on the item on the floor right now, which is going forward with the will that council already expressed. Does this make sense? Does this proposal on the floor make sense? Which, in my opinion, it does. It's what the lawyers say it does. But I think that we should try to keep discussion about this and not about larger governance, because that's our purpose here. Thanks.
Thank you, VP Schwartz. Next is Councillor Yang. Go ahead.
Hi. So what I wanted to do was, I guess, first of all, make it clear that it's, I think, frankly, a bit inappropriate to be making assumptions about the intentions of other members of the assembly when there really is no evidence given to that effect. And secondly, I think it is worth considering this motion because it is a mechanism for us to enact what council has already asked for. And I believe that, at least from the perspective of myself and some of the other engineering councilors, we did do consultation during those days before the last council meeting to make sure that we had a broad idea of what students wanted to see come out of this. And generally, I think we haven't heard strong opposition to the idea of moving forward with the single governing body in principle. It's some details around perhaps the implementations that need to get worked out, but broadly, we still want to work towards it.
Thank you, Councillor Yang. President Easton, go ahead.
I have nothing to add.
Thank you. Just to kind of bring this conversation somewhat back to, from my understanding, the reasoning behind the motion to indefinitely postpone, at least one of the major reasons that I can see was the point made that the governance committee did not fully give enough time to discuss the impacts on advocacy. So I'm just wondering if anyone in the governance committee would like to respond to that, and so that might help the rest of the council at large who was not there at least know what was discussed at the governance committee. And I will let VP Schwartz directly respond to this, even though we're not allowed to, but because it's a cushion towards those people, I'll let them directly respond.
Yeah, I figured that I was just responding to your question because I said on the governance committee, and I don't have the full. I'm going to offer some information, but I'm going to allow somebody else on the governance committee to also speak up because it's a good idea that we get as many people in here as possible. But the previous meeting of the governance committee, as Councilor Macri says, yeah, we discussed a number of different items and sort of got some of the will of what the governance committee thought on those items. But that amount of time is certainly not enough to develop a fulsome report on what direction or on what impact this has on advocacy and things like that. But correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't supposed to, because we're not approving bylaws yet. We're not approving draft bylaws for this new model. And that report is to give us an idea going into developing those draft bylaws and amending them and working on them until we're happy with the end product, is to give us some insight into how is this going to affect advocacy and how do we make sure this works out. That's not what's on the floor. What's on the floor is to give us more time to do that. Like I that's another one of the points that I really don't quite understand why it's relevant, because the whole point of the entirety that I'm on the floor right now is not to affect the changes of the governance review. It is to give us more time to make sure the changes we affect are the best changes we can, and to give us that extra one runway that everyone keeps talking about. So it's my understanding that more of that is going to come forward, and as required and as requested by council at the previous meeting, was that that report on the effects on advocacy, come forward before the bylaws come forward for final approval. And the whole point of this is to give us months more runway to do so that we don't have to do that yet. So it's not rushed, so we can take all of the time that we need to come up with the best solution possible. So I'll be honest that I understand there's some upsetness here sort of about the direction, but the whole point about this is to give us more time to eliminate that upsetness. So I feel like it's somewhat misplaced, and I don't quite understand the controversialness that's going on here. But yeah.
Thank you, VP Schwartz. We have Councillor Dillon, Director responding. Actually, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I noticed that as soon as I said that. Representative Ikena, go ahead with your direct response. And
so I'm on the governance committee too, as either a counselor or an at-large. I'm one of the two people. But I would just like to repeat. I just would like clarification of what I'm supposed to respond to before I give context, because I am a voting member, as I am a council. I'm on one of the counselor seats. So if the deputy speaker could please repeat the question.
Could you repeat your question? Sorry, I couldn't really hear what you were saying.
Could you please repeat the question you're asking about people who are on the governance committee?
Yes, so I was just saying, I think one of the main reasons, at least from my understanding, this motion to indefinitely postpone the consideration of amending the bylaws, which basically means like we're kind of not voting on this motion at all right now, was because Councillor Macri feels that the governance committee did not give advocate time to follow the direction of council, which apparently from last meeting was to discuss the impact of advocacy the new system would have. So, and I heard from some people that they're saying that they did consider that. So I'm just wondering if we can get as much opinion from the people on the governance committee to give their viewpoints would be a good idea for the rest of council.
All right. So as a councilor member who was on the governance committee, I do agree with Councillor Yang and also anyone else who did say there was enough discussion about advocacy, as we just spent about probably an hour just on the one topic about how things were going to work for the governance review of the bylaws. Therefore, I feel like we did adequately discuss the preliminary stuff, and I do feel like this motion to disregard extending, whereas I am interpreting the original motion that President Easton submitted is to continue and extend the motion, extend the governance years so the governance committee can properly review the bylaws to send to board, and then the board, to my understanding, will present it to council. Therefore, it'll be kind of like how things were supposed to be set out. That is all.
Thank you. Councillor Macri, go ahead with your POI.
I have a question for the deputy speaker. You were also at that meeting. I agree with what Councillor Ikeno said about us. We did spend a fair amount of time discussing constituency versus faculty reps, but in your estimation, how much time was spent specifically discussing advocacy impacts, which council tasked the committee to discuss?
First of all, I'll begin with, I was not present in the last council meeting, so I don't know the exact motion that was passed at council because it was a motion brought up on the floor, but from what I remember, we spent about an hour and 15 minutes discussing constituency versus liaisons, and then we spent about 10 to 15 minutes, and that was after extending the meeting time once or twice, I believe. Once, I think, for about 10 to 15 minutes. If that answers your question.
10 to 15 minutes on
advocacy.
Thank you.
Moving on, we have a direct response from Councillor Dillon.
Thanks, yeah. For VP Schwartz, I just want to kind of ask, I'm a little bit confused as to why the bylaw amendment allows for the board to kind of defer this decision, of the election to 1 year after the AGM, when it seemed like last meeting, the election option we voted on was a timeline that's much shorter than that. So I feel like it kind of just negates the decision that we as council agreed to last meeting, rather than, enabling specifically that decision, which seemed like a much shorter timeline.
Can I say something, or?
I will let you go first, Matthew, and then I will. Wiki, who's your direct response to? Because, like, in all honesty, I'm not going to allow direct responses in between of direct responses to direct responses. That's really complicated. So please bring that as a new point. Go ahead, VP Schwartz.
Thank you, Cannon. Yeah, for sure. So as I said, we took what council said and brought it to the lawyers, and that's what the lawyers drafted. If I had to hazard a guess as to why, an educated guess, but a guess nonetheless, it's because, maybe council wants to do this, wants to extend longer, maybe something happens, something like that. This doesn't mean that the board is going to extend the whole year, and I very much doubt, and I would be personally opposed as a director to extending a length longer than council wants, or than council indicated. Like, this allows us to do what council wanted, but this is purely what was drafted by the lawyers. I didn't ask them to do it that way. And Ben might have more insight into that. But I did not ask them to draft it this way. This is what the lawyers felt was the best implementation of what council wanted to give, flexibility.
If I could just add.
Go ahead, President Easton.
Yeah, so the language was drafted entirely by the lawyers. If the date of coming into force of any new bylaws would be decided at a general meeting where those bylaws are ratified. So like just because the amendment here is meant to give more room than would be required.
Councillor Macri, I would ask you to reduce the number of POIs that you're doing, but I will let this one slide, so just be careful in future.
So a question for the president. Given the state of COVID restrictions, can you guarantee that a general meeting would be of all members and not just councillors, and allow all students to have a say in the dissolving of council?
I intend to call a general meeting to be held virtually. A properly constituted general meeting with a quorum of 200 is what I intend to do. Which is why I frankly reject the entire notion that this is being done undemocratically or like in a rushed manner. Like we have worked on this the entire governing year thus far, worked through all of our governing bodies, the council and in the board. Any changes would have to go to the general meeting, including for this bylaw amendment we are presently considering. In fact, it'll require that we have 3 general meetings in the next calendar year. One for the ratification of a bylaw amendment, should it pass. Another for the ratification of a new set of bylaws, and a third one for the election of a new board of directors under the new model if we move there. The bylaws are structured in such a way that democratic participation is required for changes to happen. We are following that. It's like, there's a balance to be struck between we are following the democratic processes laid out in our bylaws, and I'll just suggest to the talk that the governance committee insufficiently considered the impacts on advocacy. Again, the motion on the floor is to indefinitely suspend, which I should say, if it passes, then we may as well, I'll advise council that we should hold a traditional election this cycle and just give up on the project entirely, because in the absence of this, it's either we hold a special meeting to present the entire set of bylaws to make it done by the next governing year, or we hold a traditional election to make sure that we're compliant. Giving us an extended runway allows us to consider in further detail the intricacies of the advocacy question. That is, like, I don't know. I'm honestly struggling with the suggestion that I'm like personally motivated to doing this and that
sorry,
it's a coup. Like, I have no time for that.
Ben, sorry. First of all, VP Emo, go ahead with your point of order.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if the point of the order is the right way to do this, but like to my understanding, Vincent's motion to postpone indefinitely was like how like not to postpone the governance review or whatnot indefinitely. It was like a motion to impact like how we engage in debate. Like it's a Robert's rule thing.
Could you clarify a bit more on that?
Yeah, I'm just reading something up here, but basically, it's a type of motion that enables members who have exhausted their right of debate on the main question to speak further, because as explained under standard characteristic 5, the motion to postpone indefinitely, though technically a new question, necessarily involves debate of the main question. Yeah, I would prefer Vincent to clarify as needed, but to my understanding, that's essentially what he's trying to do. And I think it's important that we like are all on the same page with what it is we are debating.
Thank you, VP Emo. Councillor Macri, I will let you do your point of order.
Yeah. So just to echo what Councillor Emo was saying, yes, a motion to indefinitely suspend consideration is roughly equivalent to the motion failing. I guess the main difference is the motion doesn't fail in terms of like how it impacts future governing years. It is basically, it's suspended for the duration of the governing session. So in our case, a governing year.
Thank you. Okay. For clarifying, Councillor Macri. Go ahead, Councillor Yang, with your point of order.
I just want to clarify and ask, is it true that this effect would be for the entire governing year? Because to my belief, we are council structures that each council meeting is a separate session of council.
I'm not sure, and this has put me on the spot. I'll responding to Council Land point of orders take precedence over any other point, in my opinion. So that's why I'm letting points of order go before I also have a point of inquiry before that. So I'm not that much of an expert in Robert rules here. President Easton, would you be able to look into that till the time I can actually just, first of all, like in all honesty, the deputy speaker, I think I should have asked Councillor Macri to take some of the words they said about people wanting to rush through this because they want to leave a legacy, because I think that is somewhat inappropriate to say at this meeting. We all come here in good faith to work on that, and I apologize for not picking that up sooner.
I'd like the apology spoken into the record.
Yep, my apologies. I withdraw my earlier comment.
Thank you, Councillor Macri. The next thing I was going to say, till the time we're figuring out Councillor Yang's POO, which I believe President Easton is looking into, I just want to ask, would it be possible? I think one of the main issues that being asked at this motion is that the board has the sole right to do this. I think, why don't we just make it on advice of council, or the advice of the, what's it called, the officers of council or something, so at least there is some kind of equality there. I think that should not be too much of an issue if we are planning this election well in advance. I think getting council to, let's say, recommend a date or a timeline should not be that much of an issue. And I think that will help us move along with this meeting. Anyone's thoughts on that? Go ahead, VP Schwartz.
Thank you. I have no personal opposition to such a way. The one thing I'll say, and it's more just like rule of thumb sort of thing, is I certainly feel kind of weird about like amending something that was written by the lawyers for some express purpose to do something like that. But as long as like we're okay with that, I suppose, then that's fine. I have no issue. I certainly think it'd be more difficult to like wait for another meeting to do this. I have no opposition to that proposal in principle at all. It's just if lawyers wrote something, should we amend what lawyers wrote and then pass it as? I don't know. But absolutely, that's exactly how I see it anyway. I don't see any version of this where I know there's no version of this where I, as a director, vote to suspend without the express wishes of council. Personally, like I would see that as
I think while we, and I might be speaking out of turn here, but I think while obviously legal advice is something that we should all take in consideration, I think this is a small enough change, and I believe a lot of times our lawyers give power to our board of directors because that's the body they most kind of interact with. And I think this should not cause any legal issues that we have. But I think that's it. President Easton, were you able to figure out the answer to Councillor Yang's question?
I'm trying to find it, but
worries.
What I'll say for the purposes of the meeting, and this might be a little out of order, but I would be more than happy to amend the text to add, so the board of directors may, in its sole to replace in its sole discretion with on the advice of council, defer this election to a date. And again, I'll reiterate my point that I made earlier that like the dates in the coming into force, all of those decisions will be made by the general meeting, which is the governing body, in fact, supreme to both board and council. So like I do think we're splitting hairs, to be frank.
I agree with that. I guess before I move anything on the floor, I will let Councillor Lan have their POI.
Thanks. I just have a question for Mr. President. So you mentioned that like we have 3 coming general meetings. What is the timeline for each general meeting, or when is it?
Sure. So if this bylaw amendment is approved by council today, I will give notice to the board of directors for a special board meeting to approve it this month, like likely in the week before Christmas Eve, like the 20th or so of December. Instead of if the board approves it, then I will call a special general meeting likely in the 3rd week of January to ratify this specific bylaw amendment change. I'll share my screen. This bylaw amendment change. Then subsequent to that, I will call a special meeting of board and council, have the lawyers and consultants join us to read through a new bylaw, like entirely new bylaw set to the effect of the model. And we can take our time and go through article by article and ask which concerns with the lawyers present, because this is a bit tiring for me. I am not a lawyer. It's very difficult for me to defend the specific text because I didn't write it, and I'm not really qualified to give an opinion on it, frankly. Then we'll have this sort of late January, early February meeting of board, council. Any students that want to come will enter committee of the whole. Everybody will take 12 hours. I don't care. We'll go through every single word in the bloody thing, and hopefully we're okay with it. Then we'll send it to a proper meeting of council for approval and the board of directors for approval. Provided those things happen, we will have the annual general meeting in March, likely the middle of March, to ratify the new set of bylaws, at which point we will decide on a coming into force date, which probably will be like the 1st of September or something. And then the Ontario Nonprofit Corporations Act, which has recently come into force, basically has that directors are elected by general meetings, which is why, for example, like we ratify our executive elections at the general meeting, because technically the election of officers has to happen at a general meeting, not in this sort of like general election process we have. So like formally the election takes place at the meeting. Anyway, we'll have a special meeting in spring to ratify to ratify the election of officers to the new system, which will come into force on the 1st of September. That is like the timeline that we're working on. So that being said, if we don't do this now, actually, I'll cut myself off, but that's the timeline I have in my head, if that helps.
Thank you, President Easton. First of all, I would like for you to take back some of the swearing that you did at this comment. I know we're all getting passionate here. Just keep that in mind.
I apologize.
No worries. Thank you. At this point, if the Assembly is open to it, I'm gonna call the question on the postponement, and then I will, if that fails, I will make an amendment to the bylaw. I'll move the motion to make the amendment to the bylaw to include council there. Councillor Macri, go ahead with your point of order.
Does any motion not need to be put into the speaking order first? There are still people in the speaking order.
That's why I'm asking if the council as a whole is okay with doing that.
I am not okay. People still have not had, there are people who have not had chances to speak yet. I don't even think we've gone through one set of direct responses.
And Councillor Lam, go ahead with your POI.
Yes, just further clarification about the timeline. So you said like the third general meeting is around maybe August. So when is the election for the new set of directors?
So there will be like time to solidify this, but I foresee that it would take place in the spring, or perhaps in like, because I think it would probably be bad to have it happen like in the last 2 weeks of the term before exams start. I think we should expect in a traditional governing year for it to occur in March. Following reading week is probably a better timing for it, because as we can see here, like the crunch of having it done before reading week is, I mean, we can figure that out, but in this off cycle, I think it would happen in the spring term in this particular year, but it wouldn't be like that going forward.
Do you have any contingency plan if any staff has delayed?
So this bylaw is in effect that contingency plan, because it permits us to remain compliant with the bylaws. I mean, in the worst case, or perhaps I shouldn't give a value judgment. In the case where we don't ratify a new set of bylaws, we could hold the traditional election under this present model in the spring term. I mean, we could have it coming into force on the 1st of July, for that matter. Like the general meeting could decide that if they say, no, these are unacceptable changes. We want to continue under the present model. And at that point, I would probably suggest that we have like a date of coming into force in the middle of the spring term or something like that to minimize disruption and give a spring term, or at least part of a spring term for new executives, directors, counselors, et cetera, to become acclimatized to their roles as it works presently.
Okay, thank you for your clarification.
Thank you, President Easton. VP Imo, you are next.
Sorry, did you say me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was just pulling food out of a bag. Wait, have we already made the, have we already voted on Vincent's motion?
No, we are currently still on that motion.
Can I withdraw my turn and move it to be, like after Vincent's motion? In that list? Sorry.
Next is Councillor Souza.
Hi, everyone. So I just firstly wanted to definitely emphasize that I don't think that any of the work that has been done so far has been like useless. I want to genuinely say that I really appreciate how much people are willing to put in so much work to make sure that council is working well and is doing the best for our school. So I really want to like emphasize that first. But I know that this is more so like talking about like this specific motion. So I don't want to take like too long in talking about this, but I just wanted to talk about not knowing how to, I guess, I don't know. I'm it's hard for me to completely agree with everything that's happening, considering that yeah, I actually really appreciate that Benjamin mentioned earlier about like a general meeting, because I think that that's really important for getting everybody like on the same page, especially like the students, because I know that like making big changes to help the students, especially when we don't really have like a lot of, I wouldn't say transparency, it's just like a lot of people like don't really pay attention. It doesn't help to like change things very drastically without like also telling them, because then that's just like another layer of like mistrust. But I do think that you know, delaying the election makes sense, of course, in order to like add additional time. But I just feel like it would be more useful to kind of like use this time to better define roles that we have within council, and to kind of observe the power shift in this. And I understand that like by creating a flatter hierarchy, we're trying to kind of like balance these things out, but I'm seeing that like a lot of the power kind of ends up in like this, I guess, like the higher part of that flatter hierarchy, and it kind of takes away a lot of what the counselors and the students can do. So I don't know. I just wanted to express that concern. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Souza. We will move to Councillor Camry, I believe.
Cami.
Cami. I was so close. I was trying to look up your name exactly.
Oh, it's okay. So my point was more about the motion presented and not about Vincent's motion. So I am going to defer my speaking turn to speaking on that motion after if Vincent's motion fails.
Thank you, Councillor Camry. Representative Ikea, go ahead.
I would like to call the question.
We have a call to question. I will second that. So basically, calling the question, as we have done in the past, means there will be no debate. We'll just go to voting if we want to discuss this any longer or not. If we, yeah. Basically, we'll just go on voting directly now. So I am going to ask people to react in the chat to, I'm just going to type call the. Councillor Macri, go ahead with your POI.
I just want to confirm that calling the question doesn't change what you said earlier about holding a roll call vote.
No, it won't. I will be letting. Well,
So
sorry, this is just a second, folks. Ben, clarify me because I'm getting really confused right here. First, we need to vote on the call the question motion by 2/3 majority, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, calling the question requires 2/3. And I'm reading it. So like we're voting on the motion to indefinitely suspend consideration of the motion or postpone consideration of the motion.
Yes.
So to be honest, I am not certain what that means. I'm like, I have it's article like 14.9 of Robert's rules of order newly revised, but like I'm not confident of what the effect of voting on. I mean, we're voting on calling the question, but once we actually vote on the motion, I don't know what it actually means. But I think this is probably a discussion that is out of order. to be honest, because we should just proceed immediately to the vote. Now there's
Yes.
been a moved and seconded call to question.
Yes. We will go to that after we call the question, I guess, man. Well, it doesn't make sense at that point. But again, I'm just gonna say, from my understanding, calling the postpone basically means we won't be able to approve this motion or bring this motion back to council for the rest of the governing year, from my understanding. But yeah, that's it. And let's vote. I'm gonna put something in the chat and people will have to react. Thumbs up for in favor. Angry face for abstaining. And sad face for against. Let's just do that. We have 8 people voting, or 9 people in total. Sorry, guys. Can someone clarify what I said? I just want to make sure angry is abstaining and sad is against, right?
Yes.
Yes. Sad is against, angry is abstaining. We have in total 10, 11, 12 people voted, and we have more than 34 people in this chat. I would advise everyone to please vote. Yes, please, only councillors vote. I am looking at the results, but just making sure only councillors and people who have voting rights can vote. For Councillor Land, when you say no, what do you mean no? Like, are you against the motion?
Oh no, I'm saying that non-councillors cannot vote. Sorry about the confusion.
Thank you. 13, 14 people have voted, and 2/3 of 14 is. Okay, I'm just gonna make sure my counting is correct. The motion to call has failed. Motion to call the question has failed, so we will be going back to our original speaking order. And the next in line, well, the motion failed by. Sorry, Councillor Lang, go ahead with your point of order.
So Whitefield, we have 8 yes and 1 no.
Yeah, I was saying that, so I will say that. In total, 8 people total people voted was 8, 5, 14 people voted in total. And we need a 2/3 majority to call the question, so that would be 9 people. And since only 8 people voted in favor, the motion failed.
Canon, is it not of votes cast affirmatively or negatively?
I think it's total.
Actually,
Because
I'm not sure that you're allowed to abstain from calling the question.
Let's look at that. Actually, you are correct. Sorry, Ben. Abstentions don't count. So people stop voting. Yes, the question is called. Councillor Macri, go ahead with your point of order.
Do people who didn't vote at all, like who didn't react with any emojis, count as abstaining?
Yes.
Or
because this was not a roll call vote, this was just a regular vote, I would call a roll call vote of the actual motion. Because that would mean I have to go down the list of all the people in this chat and ask them to say their vote out aloud and calculate those things. So the motion to call the question passed. We are actually now going to vote on the actual motion, which was the motion to indefinitely suspend consideration of the motion. And this is where I'm going to do a roll call vote. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to call your name as I go down the list of the participants, and please tell me if you're voting, however you're voting. Our first voting member is Councillor Kami.
Sorry, can you just do a clarification what a yay or a nay means?
So yay would mean that we are gonna suspend, we are not gonna consider the original motion, the approval of amending bylaws at all. Does that make it clear?
For the rest of the governing year.
For the rest of the governing year, yes.
Okay, my vote is nay.
Nay, okay. Mike, can you keep a tab, like, keep a record of that?
Yep.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, Andy, you are a counselor, right? Or no?
Amelia is a
no, Amelia is. I was talking about Andy. Andy Wren.
He is.
Okay, perfect. Andy, how are you voting? If you're speaking, you're muted. No response. I guess we will move on. I'll try and come back to them later. Next is, oh, they sent a message. Andy, are you voting in favor or against the motion to indefinitely suspend? Just say out aloud. Voted in favor of, okay, so we have 1 against, 1 in favor. Next is Angad.
I'm voted against, so nay.
Against, okay, thank you. Next is, actually, I'm going to start saying Councilor Souza, go ahead.
Is this for, like, if we say yes, it's to run the election or to not run the election?
If you say yes to this, we will be running the election in the normal time period that we have. There will be no suspension of, and there will be no new bylaws added based on this.
Okay, so no. Wait, yeah, no.
No, okay, thank you. Yes, as Creepy Dong added in the chat, please refer there if you would like to get more clarification. I know this is really confusing, folks. Sorry for that. Councillor Gupta, go ahead.
I would say I'm against this motion.
Thank you. President Easton.
I oppose the motion.
Thank you. VP Dong.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Yang.
I reject.
Thank you. Councillor Yip.
I oppose.
Oppose. Okay, thank you. Councillor Holland.
I also oppose.
Thank you. Councillor Dillon.
I'm opposed.
Thank you. Councillor Lan.
I oppose.
Councillor Kong. Gia, are you a counselor? God, this is confusing. Yes, they are a counselor. If you're speaking, we can't hear you right now.
It's Jaja, is how you pronounce.
Jayas, thank you for correcting me. Guys, please do not type anything in the chat. I'm not looking in the chat. I am going through a list of people as they show up in my participant list, so please keep that in mind. We will come back to Councillor Kong later. We will move to Councillor Ma.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Bacot. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Marie. Okay, I will come back to Marie later too. VP Schwartz.
Nay.
President Amir.
I oppose.
Councillor Chen. Carolyn. We'll come back to them later. Councillor Dragusin.
Can I just abstain for now?
Sure. Councillor Devani. If you are speaking, you are muted right now. Okay, we will come back to you later. Councillor Ismail.
I oppose.
VP Email.
I oppose.
Representative Sharma.
I oppose.
Representative Aquino, sorry.
I oppose.
Councillor Macri.
In favor, noted.
I'm just going to go back to the 4 people who didn't vote, and then we'll move on if they don't still vote. First was Councillor Kong, Jaya.
If before we do that, could I change my vote to in favor? This is Angela.
Mike, can you note that Angela Souza changed their vote to in favor?
Yes. I also saw that Andy Wren in the chat wanted to change their vote. Can we have that spoken at least?
Sure. And Councillor Wren wants to change their vote to opposed. Next we have Marie. Marie, are you here? It seems like not. Carolyn Chen.
I oppose.
Carolyn Chen opposes. Sahil Devani.
I'm in favor.
In favor. Okay, so we have 2 abstentions right now, which are Gia and Marie, because they are not speaking. So I'm going to assume they abstain on this vote. Before declaring the results, does anyone want to change their... Oh, okay. Marie opposes. So we only have 1 abstention. Well, no abstention. Gia also opposes. Perfect. So, Mike, before I let you, I guess, say other results, does anyone want to change their votes? Councillor Land, go ahead with your point of order.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, what is your vote on this?
I do not vote unless there's a tie. As the person running this meeting.
You're also a councillor.
Yes, but I'm also the deputy speaker, so I lose my right to vote on things unless there's a tie if I'm chairing a meeting.
Okay.
Mike, can you declare the results?
We have 3 for, and that's Angela, Vincent, and Sahil. And we have 20 against. And we have 2 abstaining because I think that's Joseph Ma and Rebecca Dregeson.
Perfect. Thank you. So the motion to indefinitely postpone has been defeated, and we are back to the actual motion at hand. And we have VP Emo and followed by Councillor Kami, and then it's going to be me.
Yeah.
Go.
I'm trying to figure out a way to say this. I guess my reading on sort of the conflict that's going on here, and I think that there's a lot of things happening here, but like I think that the motion being proposed by President Easton is a natural extension of what board and council has instructed us to do. So I think it's democratic in that sense, and like it makes sense to me to go that way. I feel like a lot of the critiques or what folks are saying about feeling rushed. Like the governance review is our big changes. You know, with timelines and whatnot, everyone's sort of getting confused. They didn't feel as if they had adequate time to sort of think on these things. And I understand, you know, the need to go fairly quickly. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, it's very different when you've been thinking about governance a lot and maybe you've fully accepted and like understood that like this was the magnitude of changes that was going to happen. But like I think that a lot of folks were not really expecting that, or they needed more time to consult with their students. They needed more time to think on it. Like I definitely spoke to a few counselors sort of after the fact of the meeting, and you know their minds have changed sort of since then after giving it more thought. And I feel like it's really important as we move forward to make sure that people feel well equipped, that they had the ample time, the ample sort of understanding to be firm in their decision when they say yes to something. And my sense is that a lot of people felt sort of pressured to make a decision last council, which is why I think we have a little bit of what I perceive as sort of take backsies. What I guess I would advise, I think it makes sense to let the motion pass, perhaps with some amendments, because I do think that we need that additional 4-month time in order to sort things out, and that by extending the governing year, it enables us to have those sort of conversations and figure those things out. But I do think that more needs to be done, and that there needs to be more accountabilities to ensure that council doesn't feel railroaded. And I, you know, it's a difficult thing to facilitate. Governance is a very complicated thing, and I don't mean to be pointing fingers at specific individuals and whatnot. Like, I think everyone's been working really hard on this, but I'm just seeing that in terms of how people are feeling about their ability to sort of participate in these things, that it's like people aren't feeling okay, and I feel like we need to pay attention to that. Like everyone has a right to participate, everyone should have the means to participate, and that's something that I think is lacking. I'm not really sure how to fix it. I guess I would just like to provide the assurance that that's something that's on my mind at least. And if you feel as if you can't engage or whatnot in conversation on these topics, or just counsel more generally, like talk to me, talk to your peers and whatnot. But yeah, I guess I just want to try and find a solution sort of moving forward, but I would encourage you to pass this motion just so that we could extend the governing year and that we can have those conversations. But like, I definitely do agree that something needs to happen to make sure that folks feel that they can make these decisions. But I don't think that voting down this motion in an attempt to get that really makes any sense. I feel like that actually like prevents that from happening. So yeah.
Thank you, VP Emo. Councillor Kami, go ahead.
Yeah, so I know we had discussed earlier about amending the motion, which I am very much in favor for, because like some of my other counselors have discussed, I do take issue with the sole discretion language, allowing board to call an election, but I am strongly in favor of extending the governing year because, like VP Emo said, we need that time to have these conversations, and either rushing it to get everything done before April 2022 is not feasible, and prolonging it and having another regular election, it just prolongs the process. And I fear that the changes that need to be made to the governing model will not be made with this sort of changeover and introducing new opinions and new ideas, which definitely need to be counted for, but I feel it could derail the process or procrastinate the process unnecessarily and make it more painful on the student body. So ultimately, I am in favor of passing the motion with an amendment to ensure that board and council must agree before calling an election, and that it is not just board's sole discretion.
Thank you, Councillor Kami. Next is my turn, I guess, and I'm just going to move an amendment to the amendment provided below to get rid of the word, let me open, in the sole discretion, and replace that with on the recommendation of council. If that makes sense for both articles, for both 2.1 and 2.2 kind of a thing.
I'll second that.
Okay. Next, okay, so I moved that and VP Short seconded it as the mover, I guess. I think it's, I'll have the first one to speak. I think it's pretty obvious. Like, I think this is a contentious point for a lot of us here, and it helps us kind of get rid of some of the concerns that some of the councils have shown, and will help us work along in a cohesive manner. So that's it. Anyone wants to speak on this amendment? Nope. I guess we will go on a point of privilege. Go ahead, Councillor Yang.
Can you put that on the screen?
Give me a second. Okay, yeah, I guess Ben did. So basically what we'll be doing is removing the word in its sole discretion in both of the amendments to say on recommendation of council. If that makes sense. Anyone has any other clarifying questions before we, or just points to make? Nope, I guess, okay. Anyone against making? Okay, we have a point of privilege from Councillor Macri, and then we'll go to your question, Catherine.
Can you put like the amendment text like either like up on the document or in the chat or something?
Yes,
I
there we go.
just put in chat.
And this would be in both instances in its sole discretion?
Yes. VP Dong, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question just to make sure I fully understand, because I feel like this is, I don't know where I was going with that. Ben, could you clarify right now what the process for setting election dates is, and then after passing an amendment to the bylaw, what steps we go through to confirm election dates?
So presently the bylaws require that there be an election held by the winter reading week. And then any council is given the explicit authority to establish procedures for elections. So elections and referenda procedure are procedures of Students' Council, which outlines, so usually we have like a 13-week nomination period, the all candidates meeting, the campaign period, et cetera, et cetera. So council is usually responsible for the procedures that govern elections, but then there's like an independent commission on elections and referenda, and we hire a chief returning officer to carry out that. So like in this, I'm kind of forgetting what your question was. I apologize.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure that myself, and I guess by extension myself, the entire assembly, 100% understood where the powers currently lie, and then where they will lie when it comes to establishing election dates.
Right. And it likely it will be like, I imagine, if provided this passes, provided all the everything goes according to the steps I outlined when I was speaking to Councillor Land earlier, the general meeting would set a date. Like, I imagine that at a general meeting where a new set of bylaws are approved, we would have at that same time like provisions on how we are going to conduct elections in that particular cycle. And then the new board would have to like establish elections and referenda procedure, or keep the ones that we have presently and just adapt them for the new positions that would be available. But again, any dates I imagine will be approved by the general meeting in the coming into force provisions.
Thank you, President Eastern. VP Dong. Councillor Yang, go ahead.
I cede my time to member Feifel to speak.
Thank you, Councillor
Thank
Yang.
you very much. I would like to speak against. Sorry, this is the motion to adjust the subsections.
Yeah. So basically,
sorry, correction.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I got confused. This is still on the amendment, correct?
Yep.
All right. Going back to that, I guess my question was, will this be legally permissible, or do we have to go back to the lawyers on this?
If I may respond.
Go ahead, Ben.
So in the sake of like expediency, I will give notice to the board of directors. Like, if this passes, I will give notice to the board of directors immediately, and we will seek a legal opinion to give to the board at such a time, or before the board meets to approve it. And I'll note for the assembly that board actually has a higher threshold for approving bylaw amendments. It's 2/3. And a legal opinion will be presented at that time. So there will be an opportunity to pump the brakes if this is something bad that we're doing.
Thank you to Councillor Yang and President Easton. So we will vote on this now. Anyone who is against the amendment, please type it in the chat. Same with abstaining. I'll give everyone like 5 seconds. 1. Councillor Yang abstains, but VP Dong abstains. Okay, I guess that's it. The amendment has passed, and now we are back on the original motion as amended. And next in the speaking order was Councillor Lan. And also this, well, it doesn't really matter because none of this will be noted, but Representative Sharma also abstained. But go ahead, Councillor Lan.
Okay, thank you. As we have discussed today, we know that we need to have some changes for our governing body, and these changes must be done as soon as possible. We know we have to have a efficient governing body at USA. Currently, I think the current council is not that efficient, but keep in mind that we need to follow our timelines for the changes. I would say like delaying one term for elections shouldn't be a huge problem at this point. That's my comment, and I would like to sponsor Chen Tai for his speaking order.
Thank you. Go ahead, Chen.
Hi, everyone. I was just interested in the conflict of interest issue, since we're talking about suspending elections, and there are people potentially in this call who might benefit from the suspension of elections. My understanding is that the executives receive monetary compensation, and I was wondering what their plan is to distance themselves from having undue influence over this decision in Students' Council due to their conflict of interest. Thank you.
President Easton, go ahead.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks, Chen. That's a very good point to bring up. As I sort of mentioned earlier, like any of these changes will have to go through will require approval by the membership through a general meeting. And I guess it's, the nature of conflicts of interest is that oftentimes they can't be avoided. It's just that how we deal with them and that we're transparent with them. Yeah. So I mean, if it makes the assembly more comfortable, I can abstain from the motion itself. But like any of these changes will I don't think I have the ability singularly myself to affect the outcome of the changes because of the way that our democratic decision making works. So I'm not sure that there is any I don't know if I have enough influence over the process to affect the change that would ostensibly benefit myself if I stay in office, but it's a good point to raise.
Thank you. Matthew, before I let you respond, I think technically as the chair of the meeting, it's up to me to figure out how we deal with conflicts. And I think the most important, and I'm just going to kind of direct, put something in everyone's mind. We all know our executives are overworked, are underpaid, underappreciated. No one is dying to get into this job. Let's be honest, with our elections over the last few years, we barely have enough people running to fill these seats. And they are also technically fiduciaries of the body. The first and foremost job that they have is to think of the organization as a whole. And I have no doubt that they do that job really well. And I think they should be allowed to vote on this because they are the one who are actually doing the brunt of the work here. And they should have a say in how an organization is run, especially because they were elected to do that day-to-day running. Next is VP Schwartz. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'll make this quick because I mostly echo everything Ben has to say. But I really appreciate bringing that up, Chen, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this myself. Because obviously this has become a very big part of my day, week, month, and now year. And and it has a big effect on it. I spend a lot of time thinking about it, but I certainly also have that conflict of interest. And I mean, as I said, I'm personally not in the position to continue, but I don't feel that that's hugely relevant, and nor do I think it compromises the extending the year. But I'm not in the position to continue full time afterwards. But I'll note that at the previous meeting, where the actual discussion between council, between which timeline options they want, how we want to go about this, when that discussion was undertaken, I argued very strongly for the extending the governing year side, while also noting my conflict of interest, because it's important that everybody knows about that. But certainly, as spoken, it's not possible when talking about issues of like systemic governance to not have to not have any conflicts of interest when you're talking about it, because by being in a position to talk about it, you necessarily have a conflict. So it's sort of a fun puzzle for us. But and bringing this forward, this is more, I think acting in what council expressed was interest, which I feel makes it somewhat different. And yes, I appreciate that those thoughts. And if you have any thoughts on what you think could or should be done differently, I'd be very happy to hear it. But I feel I've given my best effort to make my conflict clear, while also stating my reasons why I am arguing for specific sides in this, which I feel is my responsibility as a director and as a fiduciary. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, Chen, you have a direct response, and I'll sponsor that.
Yeah, thank you. I have a suggestion on how to handle conflicts of interest. Back in my time on the WCRI board, a multi-million-dollar per year revenue corporation, the way we handled it was, if you had a conflict of interest, you can simply sit out of the discussion until the rest of the council determines it's appropriate for you to speak. And considering that there are like a significant amount of council members that haven't actually talked yet in this meeting, I think it could be a potential solution to deal with conflicts of interest to let them deal with the discussion on this motion instead, since I'm sure their input would be very valuable. Right, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Chen. Since I'm kind of jumping the speaking order because I think as the person who's running this meeting, I think it's not really feasible for us not to have our executives here, because they are the people we are asking these questions to. Like, if you ask me what the lawyer said, I would have no clue, because I'm not the one who deals with our lawyers and have discussions with them. I think the executives did raise these conflicts initially, even last meeting, I believe, and everyone on council is aware. Technically, even council has a conflict because they get to remain on council for an extra term at that point. What the hell happens? Like, everyone has a conflict then. And as Ben mentioned, I think us having our GM having to amend this bylaw is the best way for us to deal with that conflict, because it's not just the people who get to remain in power any longer. It's actually the people who elected those people, in a way, get to decide if this is something that they want us to do or not. But I will let VP Dong directly respond, followed by Councillor Lan.
I flicked my mic up, so thanks. I did want to, I guess, in a similar vein as Matthew, sort of thank you, Chen, for bringing that up. Obviously, I can say that there are a lot of things that council does that has to do that like brings up conflicts, like council is approving fees for which each individual councillor pays. But obviously, I recognize that executive compensation is very much at a different magnitude than like the fees. I guess what I can sort of offer as the way that I generally try to manage that conflict, and I say carefully manage because I've spent my entire undergraduate career on various decision-making bodies, and the first thing you do at the beginning of every term is like submit your conflict of interest form, and I've come to understand more each term what that means. And a really important thing that somebody said the other day to the Board of Governors was that it's not about completely avoiding conflicts, because then you shut out the people who probably know the most about what you're talking about, but about managing conflicts. So making them very clear, allowing the person chairing the meeting to make, I guess, informed and executive decisions about what is and is not appropriate based on how they believe that what a person is saying is influencing the decision, either in a way that is fair or in a way that is undual. I don't know if that's a word. So the way that I try to manage it for myself is I try to present as much information as I can that counselors might not be privy to otherwise. So, maybe in the broader conversation of a governance review, I sort of speak to what the position of Vice President Student Life looks like, the impact it has on a person, how effective the job as it is currently structured and supported, how effective that structure allows a person in that position to be in terms of doing good things. So I can sort of speak to all of those things, but I try to do it in a way such that I'm informing council and empowering them to make an informed decision, as opposed to, speaking based on the fact that, I don't know, I'll be employed for a third of a year longer. Like, that's not how I think of it. I think of it as the fact that I'm on the board of directors and council tasked us last meeting to work towards implementing something that extends the governing year, and speaking in favor here and potentially voting in favor depending on what the speaker says. That is fulfilling exactly what council asked me to do. So it is definitely tricky, but I guess I try to manage my conflicts, and I trust the chair of the assembly to support me in managing those conflicts.
Thank you, VP Dong. Councillor Macri, go ahead with your point of order.
May I be permitted to read 2 short sentences from Robert's Rules that I think should clear up this issue?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
May I be permitted to read 2 short sentences from Robert's Rules of Order that I think would clarify this issue?
This is a misuse of point of order. I'm not going to let it be, because I think point of order is something if a rule is not being followed and not to give information. Okay. So if you want to speak on that, you can have a speaking turn. Councillor Lan, you have a direct response. Go ahead, but before you do that, Mike, can you note that Councillor Ren left at 11:30 p.m.? Sorry, that's my time.
Noted. I'll do
yes.
1 o'clock.
Yes, thank you. And go ahead, Councillor Lan, and just to let everyone know, I'm not gonna deal with any more direct responses after Councillor Lan.
Sure. I just want to give some information to Chen. Executives here, they are getting paid. They are getting paid around 60K a year. It's pretty decent. Although Mr. Deputy Speaker said like they are underpaid, but 60K a year as a student is pretty decent. Is above the co-op student salary. 50K, yeah, 50K is still like above the co-op rate. And also but the rest of us, we are working free, including Mr. Deputy Speaker who organized this meeting today. How long we spent in our first meeting? We spent like 7 hours in our first meeting. That's 7 hours in a beautiful Sunday. I sit here to participate in the discussion. I don't get paid. I pay for nothing. I have a part-time job. I got paid $20 an hour. If I can work for my part-time on Sunday, I can make $140 on Sunday, but I choose to spend a Sunday every month to participate in this council meeting, to speak, to talk, to debate. Why I do this? Because I want to make sure that all of our students are represented, their voices are being heard by the council, by the university leadership. That's why I signed up for this. In terms of conflict of interest, we are just staying 4 months longer than the expected. Again, only 4 of us are being paid here, and the rest we are working for free. Just some information for Chen.
Thank you, Councillor Lan. Next in the speaking order, we have VP Schwartz. Go ahead, VP Schwartz.
I have a point of privilege.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I did note that. Sorry, go ahead, Representative Aquino.
May I call a 5-minute recess for people to go to the bathroom and stuff? Because we've been at this for a while.
I will just myself call for one because I don't really want to vote. Please be back at 1:10, I believe. You get 6 minutes. We have a short recess.
I guess I don't know if Jay's still here.